Yeah, we're doing something like this. Let's see if we can do it. We're discussing the thing where we want to know what things are, right? I'm trying to read in the order of what it says here. Right? We want to know what things are. And because we know what they are, we know what they do and why they do what they do, right? Or how they do what they do. That's our general mahalach. Right? Problem is to know what the things are, we sort of need to know what they do. And not only do we need to know what they do, right? That makes sense, right? Right? So for example, we want to know what thought is, so we need to know what thinking is. Thought is the thing that thinks, right?
Thought is the thing that is thought of.
No. Thinking, the problem with English is that it doesn't have enough words for this. Or the words are incorrectly translated.
Or thought the verb?
Think, again, we want to know what things are, or again, which in other words, what the soul is, right? Because we say that at least one part of the soul or one power of the soul is that it's thought, right? In the sense of this thing called thinking, or this thing that thinks, right? The capacity to think is really what we call the soul, for the most part, and actually entirely. The capacity, the ability, the thought as in the scent, the faculty of thought, right? We have this word faculty. That just means, right, not thought as in a thought, although that's very connected. Thought as in the power of, no, also not. Thought as in the power of thinking, the ability to think, right? Thought as in the ability to think. Okay.
All souls?
What?
All souls are
It's a soul. The ability to think is a soul. Just like the ability to perceive is a soul, and or the soul for animals, and the ability to how do we call it? To neutralize is the soul for all living things, mortal living things, and then there's some that have more other kinds of soul or more soul. But the point is that each of these things, right, we discussed in general what it would mean for there to be such a thing, right? That means the form of blah blah blah. But we need to understand really what we're talking about. We can't just, because the general form is just an empty form, right? We need to explain what it is. So we need to explain, right? This is going back to previous things. So we need to know, if you tell me the form is the ability of living things to do living things, right? We need to really answer what life is. That's the same way of saying the same thing. And therefore we need to say what thinking is, or what perceiving is, or what neutralizing is, right? And this is our method for everything. We know what something is, and that's how we know what it does, because of what it is. Right? The baya is that we can't really go this way. We need to go in a backwards order or a different order, because in order to know what something is, we need to know what it does. Because it's what it is defined by what it does, right? And, right, that was step 2. And what I'm saying now in step 3 is, in order to know what it does, we need to know what it does towards, right? That's the way we say object, what it intends, so to speak, right? Because in other words, this is important, we discussed this never. He doesn't think that we can define things internally, in the sense of internal to the soul, right, to the subject. Like I can't say that, let's say someone would say thinking and perceiving are just the same thing, which is what we discussed this, right? What every materialist has to say. Or maybe people would say even thinking and perceiving and surviving are the same thing. In other words, neutralizing is the same thing. So there's only a nutritive soul, right? According to Darwinian people. In order to say that, the way the metaphysics that allows you to say that is the kind of metaphysics that can define things without reference to their end, right? There's another way of saying without final causes, right? So object is just a final cause, so remember. Because if I ask you what thinking is, there's 2 ways of answering this question. Very important to realize this, because this is a very basic final cause way of thinking. If I ask you what thinking is, you could say thinking, like, well, what's the difference between thinking and feeling, for example, right? Perceiving, feeling not in the sense of emotions, but in the sense of like touch, right? What is the difference? Someone can tell you, well, the difference is something like this. Inside this subject, inside the human, thinking feels like making logical sense of things. It's like and feeling feels like just knowing that there are things, something like that, right? But what kind of things are we knowing? It doesn't make a difference. Now, theoretically, in other words, according to this metaphysics, theoretically, it's possible to think, to feel thoughts and to think objects, physical objects. It just happens to be that for every reason, the way the senses or the whatever machinery is wired, that this causes this kind of movement or this kind of thing inside the person, and that causes a different kind of thing. But the main thing, the main definition, this is how we tend to think always, that's what I'm trying to get at. We tend to think that thinking, what is thinking? It's something that happens in me. It's a kind of thing. It's like an activity that we do. An activity that is, it's inside me. And what's the difference between that and I think something and I feel something? What's the difference?
Just what the inner things.
Like what software I'm running. Like what kind of program there's in my head. I feel that you love me. That means there's some kind of button here called feeling. That I don't know what exactly. It's connected with all kinds of physical feelings or some hormones in your brain or whatever. And if I say I think you do something, it's the same thing. It's just a different one. Like a different button got pressed inside my person, right? My soul. What we're calling soul is just that, right? Or the subject inside this thing that's receiving that. In other words, it gets defined sort of solely by its activity, solely by what it is, but what kind of thing it's doing. Like as if it would be easy, and could we do that?
It's doing towards, like not what it's applying itself
Exactly.
towards.
No,
Basically, it isn't doing it towards anything else.
because it isn't towards anything
It's
else.
just an internal activity. It doesn't reference anything else.
It might reference outside, but that's another step. That's not part of what tells us what it is.
Right.
It seems to people that this is true. It seems that it's easy to tell you the difference between a feeling and a thought, or an opinion and a thought, which is even more tricky, by just saying that it's a different kind of feeling, different kind of basically, different kind of thing that happens in the person's brain or in the person's mind. I think that's what most people nowadays would answer you. Isn't that true?
Mm-hmm.
And why is that wrong? Why is that wrong?
Just answers a different question.
Which is a different question.
It's not answering what thought is. It's just saying how the body, or what the material conditions are for it.
Like the material cause.
Meaning I didn't.
The material
Right.
cause.
Right. I mean, I didn't think that nothing happened in my brain when I thought, but that's
Well,
I'm
so
asking
is
what
that
actually
enough?
thinking
Is that enough for dealing with? In other words, if there's such a, I think that really what this
Only if I'm
does,
asking what kind of
it
material
sort of
thing
seems
happens
to be
when I think.
backwards then. It seems to be backwards, meaning okay, let's forget about thought and feeling, which is
If I
complicated.
ask what eating is, and you tell me that
Is eating different than thinking in basic metaphysical sense, in any basic sense?
yeah, because eating is food.
Wait, without saying food, that's what we're trying to say. Without, normal people will tell you eating is when you're
Eating is when one
you're-
object called food.
I don't know what you're
then
then giving me Aristotelian definitions.
No,
Give me the normal
I'm
definition.
not even giving whatever. Eating
Uh-uh.
is what happens when the food goes through the esophagus and goes into the stomach and then is excreted, right?
It's
Meaning
just
you can't versus thought. Which
It's a weird thing to say, but let's say, okay. And thought is when something goes into your brain and
Right,
gets
right,
excreted.
right.
basically the difference in eating
Yeah.
and thinking is that eating
Yeah, that's
eating is much harder to
Eating
exclude
happens to
all
food and
other
thinking
all
happens
other
to thought.
objects. Eating is very hard to say that it's just in you. It's just you, not affecting.
Well, no, the
it's not
power,
act-
but
action on anything
the
else.
power to eat, right? I have a machine who is. Remember, we're not talking about
Power
the
to
activity of eating. We're
Does
just
anyone
talking about
argue
the
that
power
that's
to do
power
it.
to think also?
Yeah, of course.
No, I mean to say that,
Aristotle wants to argue with that.
that what the power to think is includes other objects.
Yes, of course. It's the ability to receive objects. There's like the power to eat.
So
I
the
think
eating
that.
also is
Yeah,
that's what
no,
I'm saying. There has
no,
to be
I don't
another
think
object
so. I
in
think
eating.
that if you don't believe in intentionality, if you don't believe in final causality, then you seem to be able to say that the power to eat is just the fact that my stomach has some enzymes. That's all.
And there just happens to be something
Yeah, it
that
happens
it's
to be.
doing it too. But
Sort of
that's not
happens to be.
connected.
Exactly. That's not what makes it what it is. That's just something that happens afterwards. And it's really the other way around. If you ask me, how does eating work? I'll tell you what it works by your
That's
stomach.
digestion, not eating.
We're talking about digestion, basically. We're talking about eating. Or whatever part that you want to pick out of this process called eating. Whichever part, any part will
If
have
we
the
talk
same
about
kind.
digestion, we'll talk about the stomach,
Any
the
part will
liver.
have the same kind of answer. How does the food become into human flesh and blood? Well, there's some cell or whatever whose job is to break it down. But it's not, that cell is not an eating cell. It's sort of blind, right? That's what basic non-teleological thinking is about, right? Yeah. And it seems to be, right, it seems to be normal to us that works, that we can define things without their objects. You could just say, well, what is the power of eating? It's just some machinery in your it happens to work pretty well with eating, but that's not necessarily the case. Theoretically, it could. In other words, when it's another, like the other nafkamina of this is that if you put rocks into your digestive system, it's also eating them. Happens to be that rocks can't be eaten. Well, let's say they can't, whatever. Something that can totally not relevant to eating. You're still eating it. It just happens to be not to become.
The gears are whirring, just nothing
Yeah.
happening, but it's trying.
Sort of. It's not.
It's-
There's not
it's
try.
not-
Trying
it's
is.
not doing anything
It's
to-
not even trying,
Yeah,
because try is like
it's not doing anything
a
that's-
intentionality
It's
word.
not doing anything.
It's not trying. It's just doing. It's what.
also
It's
not doing
still what it
anything
is.
different.
No,
Like,
it's
not
still.
doing
It's
anything
in other words, it
different
stayed what it is.
It's not doing anything different than when you eat bread. It just
It's still what it
happens
is.
not to work.
It's still what it's working. It's doing. It's exactly what it is.
Saying it happens not to work on the thing, but
Well, that's
the
different
process
ground.
is running.
Not only the process, it's what it is. The eating
Right,
faculty
so
is
eating
just
the
is
eating
not.
is
There's not.
happening.
In other words, but in other words, like you're saying, I think what this means is that there's no such a thing as eating faculty.
Right.
Right. Which is strange to the way normal people think, actually. And the main argument is generally that it doesn't explain what it is. You're not really saying what it is. You just cut off part of what it is and pretended that we only want to know how it happens, and not what it is.
Like you're saying, it's a material cause. It ends up being some sort of material
We're just describing the conditions.
Or the
that
material
make-
cause, or
we're
and the
describing
active.
bodily
Not
conditions.
really. It's
So we're
the
just-
whatever that has to do with another question.
So we're discussing the bodily conditions that allow eating.
Yeah, in
that
our
allow
language.
food to
In
be-
our language, you might also be discussing the active cause, like the moving cause, what's called. But anyways,
Saying let's say a non goal oriented definition of eating would say molecules of a certain sort spin in a certain direction. Let's say, and when if there's ever food there, it'll go into the body, and if there isn't, then it won't. But that's just what it is. But eating is not. Eating is not affected by
the food does nothing. Food does not come into the story at all.
Right.
Well, you can ask like, why was it evolved? Well, yes, it did evolve in order to eat food, but that's also just a way of speaking. It's not really true, because there's only blind forces pushing things. There's nothing pulling things, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? Things are not toward anything.
The success and failure of the thing doesn't necessarily define it in this way. Saying the success or failure of a
There's no such a
faculty-
thing as success or failure. No such a thing.
No, but not success and failure of eating. The success and failure of, let's say, in Darwinian terms, producing.
Yeah, that's just a fact. That
Right.
that doesn't have a meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It does not. It doesn't really fail. It just fails from like perspective of some people
So
that
it
speak.
fails for endurance of
Fine, but that just said it. That
So
nothing
right,
happened.
it's referencing something
Nothing
quite else,
happened.
quite apart from the
Nothing
eating.
happened. Nothing happened. Yeah, that's the normal. That's what people nowadays seem to think, and they especially think so for like so-called psychological faculties, right? Meaning things that are a little less physiological, like thinking or feeling. If I ask you what the difference between thinking and feeling is, what do normal people say nowadays? The people that don't come to my sheet, what do they think the difference is?
Thinking and feeling.
Yeah. Is there even such a
I
thing?
feel like they think
Yeah,
it's the same thing.
Okay.
That's it.
Well,
That's why people get so upset that people rationalize because they don't want to disturb what they think is the organic.
okay, what is the yeah? What is the difference? I'm not even getting into opinions and like true thoughts. What is the difference between thinking and perceiving? Is there a difference?
I don't think people generally think there's a difference.
I think people would just say when you think the thing doesn't have to be there.
Okay, isn't that weird?
I think it's strange. I
How
think
could we
it's-
think about things that are not there? Or are they there in some
They are
other
there,
way?
right? They're just there. They're lingering, but they're not right outside of us.
Okay, so wait, but that means that's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
If I
We
think
think we can do things with things that aren't there. We just wouldn't call it thought, and they were saying because of their reductive.
Perceiving and thinking, I think, are just
Yeah,
two
no
stages
problem,
of the
call
same
them
thing. In a world where you don't reference the thing thought of. The same thing, just thinking is just a word that we use to describe what happens when the perception lingers,
when.
or that it lingers in some way.
Oh, that's only one like kind of thinking. What about the difference between like logical
Thinking and
or
abstraction.
logical thinking, like reasoning? There's difference in thinking and reasoning, right? What about reasoning? Is reasoning different from feeling?
I think it would also just be seen as an extension of
Of what?
experience.
Reasoning is that's nobody thinks that. I don't know.
I
that
don't,
doesn't make
but
sense.
I've heard people say it.
Well, it's a generalization going on at least, right?
I think
It might be
especially in a-
generalizing off experience. That's
especially
okay.
in a deterministic structure, right, where people wanted to say that thinking is just determined by a set of prior conditions. So perception is just
No, you're doing philosophy. Well, I don't know what people say when they say, I have a feeling. I don't know what's a feeling. It's sort of the second step, right? If you could say that it's based reasoning is based on feelings and so on, but it's still a different thing, right? I think it's obviously a bit different thing. Is it? Like, explain me why not logically. If I think I love my wife, that's a feeling, okay? Doesn't have a rationalization. No, let's say, assuming that it doesn't have a rationalization. If I say, if I will love my wife, I should come home on time, that's reasoning, right? Those are different kinds of activities, different kinds of things that we do in our head, sort of. Both of them are in our head or inside the person. But they're different kind of things, aren't they?
As you're saying, it's inadequate to say they're the same thing.
No, I don't think anyone thinks that they're the same thing. I'm trying to get at is, could we make a distinction between them without referring the object that they think of? Right?
I think we can. Can we maybe say that one is proactive and the other is reactive? That perception is forced on me, and thinking is an activity that I can choose to do or not choose to do. Or is that also referencing too much the external conditions? Meaning, if my eyes are open and I'm looking at the wall, I can't choose for that book to be green if it's blue. But if I'm thinking about something,
Okay, that sounds like a very weird thing to say. I could think that it's green. I could think that it's very good. Could I think that it's yellow when it's green?
No.
Could I think?
No.
No, I can't. So it's just as forced by external conditions as sight.
What, thinking?
Yeah.
No, I can close my eyes and think of a green book, but it's thinking right? Okay.
No, wait. You're exactly in your story. I could look at something. See, this is another weird thing that people think that you could think whatever you want. And this has to do with cutting off
It's
thinking
very hard
from
for
the
me 'cause
object.
I don't think this, but I can try to. I can.
No. I want. Could I think?
What would be the example of eating the rock? What would be the thought example of eating the rock? Meaning your body's doing the thing, but whatever happens, it's a rock, so it doesn't.
Well, when I make a mistake,
Right.
making a mistake is the thing that it seems to be
Well,
thinking, but it's
I
not.
think that that's a puddle, but it's actually just a reflection of some. Or I think that that's the sky, but it's just.
Well,
a
then
reflection.
that's a different. No,
That's
if
when
you're
something's yellow, that's why you think something's yellow. You're making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
your sight made a mistake. Sight doesn't make mistakes. That's a very weird thing to say. You see, there's a big funny thing.
Right,
Thinking.
that's what I'm saying. It
Did
doesn't
we
make
talk about
percep-
mistakes
Perception
yet?
doesn't make mistakes.
There's mistakes. There's a discussion about
perception
mistakes
doesn't-
somewhere. Much
Perception
later,
doesn't
actually.
make mistakes, right?
Much later, and then the discussion of thought.
Perception doesn't make mistakes.
And thought makes mistakes.
Sure.
How's that? Isn't that very weird? What's failing when I made a mistake in thought?
Then knowing about things.
In other words,
Things isn't that you know.
how could perception? Why can't perception make a mistake? This is actually Aristotle's argument much later for there being perception and thought. Why can't I?
I think perception is impressed into
Why can't I make a mistake if it seems to me
Perception
that
goes
something
from
is
you.
white and it's really green? Did I make a mistake?
in sense, not in reference.
Yeah, did I make a mistake? Are my senses wrong?
No.
Can senses be wrong? Why not?
No, the sense is. I mean. the definition
Wait. But the thing is not green, right? Not objectively green.
Right.
So when you say the sense can be wrong, you just mean that
the
sense.
reference.
You just mean that sense is different than truth.
I mean, at the reference.
I don't know what reference means.
Meaning senses refer to things, right?
So what does it refer to? This thing that
So
I think is
if
yellow
if a
and is
book
really
looks,
green.
looks yellow and it's in fact green.
Yeah. So
Um,
it's true. It's a true statement that it looks yellow.
Right.
So what is that true about?
about
Is it about nothing?
perception. I'm saying it's true about what's perceived.
About my own perception, that's true.
Or it's true that green things. can
Then
be
in the
perceived
same
as
way, if I
yellow.
think something is yellow, it's always true to say that I think it's yellow, no matter what it is.
No.
That's not going to work. If you're going to return everything back to my mistake, it's always going to be true that I have a mistake. Just like I have a perception.
Mm-hmm.
If you think that perception can be wrong on thoughts, a perception is not wrong in the way that thoughts are.
Perception can't also be. The only way to change a perception is by altering conditions of the thing perceived. The way to alter thought is by reasoning.
Okay, that's a
also
weird thing.
self-referential.
That's a weird thing. That's a weird thing. How do you change how things? Well, I could change the lighting in the room, and then
Right, but
things will have different colors.
That's affecting the actual perception. It's not right. It's influenced by manipulating the external conditions of the perception. Right.
Okay.
I can't decide. I can't be looking at a book and say that's. I mean, sometimes you can, but very rarely. Let's say.
I can.
Yeah, someone could say you're looking at. I can say you're looking at a picture of something, and then someone tells me, well, actually it's something else. You're just, you're reading a few lines wrong, and you turn the picture a little bit, and then it actually makes much more sense that is the thing.
Yeah, those are optical illusion problems.
Right. I'm saying, but besides for those, let's say extra condition. Besides for special conditions.
Those are I think a sort of a kasha for this whole paradigm. But okay.
I know. No, I'm saying, but besides for those special cases, you can't.
They're not special because all vision, whatever. Let's leave that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Besides, let's
Assuming
assume that
those are
doesn't
special cases.
happen. Let's assume that doesn't happen. Okay.
Okay.
If it happens, then your thing doesn't really
Okay.
work, because that's just saying that all sight has also some judgment in it, and therefore we lose this very sharp distinction. I think so.
Right, but let's say ignoring these cases, these cases, I cannot.
Ignoring this kasha, it's not cases.
there's nothing
Ignoring
that
this.
I can't learn anything. Perception is not affected by learning. Right, whereas I can think that.
Okay, so wait. Number one, we started with one thing. I have to remember what I'm trying to see. I want to see if we can make a difference between, if we can know, making a difference, just a way of saying we can know what it is, right? Could I know what thinking is without talking about the thing that it's thinking about? Because I think that most people nowadays think that they know what thinking is without reference to the thing thought, right? The same way we can, in the food example, we understood it sort of like there's like a machinery that just does things. Who does it is a good question, but it like does things, and it's got nothing to do with food, right? Happens to be that evolution somehow blindly was mashadr that with food and seems to work out for us, but that's just like good luck, nothing real, right? What's the analogy to that with thought? It's the same thing. It's just a little more complicated. In other words, people would say that I know what thinking is. It's some kind of process that makes humans believe things, or that makes humans think things, whatever. And now I ask, okay, what does thinking mean? Is there any difference in thinking and feeling or sensing? This is, I think, where I get stuck. What is the difference?
What then? If we're not referencing the subject.
Yeah, what is the difference? The object. What is the difference?
Okay, I'm using.
Subject is me.
All right.
Object is the thing that I'm looking at. You could
Substance.
You could use it opposite, but that's not going to help me right now.
No.
Could we do that? Could we do that? Could do it? What do people think?
I think people think that. I mean, you could do it halfway. I think. You
Okay.
could say that perception is the kind of thought that's created when something is moving from the outside in, and thought is what we use to describe perception without perceiving things outside of you. Perception is perceiving things from somewhere else, but then again.
So again, thought is not of things. Is that true? Thought are not about things. Your thoughts are not about anything.
It is about things, but it's not about things that are impressing themselves. It's about
That's
things
not
that
true.
Things that are
But that's
pursued
again not
as well.
true, because you can't. That's again something very weird that people keep on saying. I don't think you could think of falsehood. No, you can't think of falsehood either.
I can't think of falsehood?
Yeah.
I could think about a chicken with a human head.
Oh God, that's not thinking. Could you think that it could exist? In other words, maybe you could, so then it's true. But could you think of, again, like when you're going back to your basic example of your book having a certain color? If your sense says that, then by definition, that's what.
I think 1 + 1 = 3.
Forget about the thinking. It'll take a sensible thing. You could think that you could see a book and has a certain color, and by seeing that, that's just true that you saw that as having a certain color. There must be, in other words, like you say, it's true that there's some conditions that caused you to think that, which is what sensing is. So now you're telling me that thought is different. Thought is freer. I could think whatever I want. It's not the outside world imposing itself on me.
Mm-hmm.
I could just think whatever I want. Okay, here, think that this is green for a minute, please. Can you do it?
I can imagine. I don't know if we want to call that a different thing.
Again, when you saw it's green, you actually saw it's white. Actually, you see that it's white, right? Now you see that it's white. How about thinking that it's green? Oh, you could imagine the same but green, but is imagination the same as thought? Isn't there a difference in imagination and thought?
That's a different question.
Well, imagination is just internal
Is
internal
imagination
sensing.
in the perception?
I don't understand the question.
Saying is this
Thinking means thinking that, as far as I understand.
Right.
Thinking is not my, doesn't mean I could have a sentence in my
thinking
mind.
about.
I could have whatever sentence I want in my mind. Actually, I'm not even sure about that, but assuming that. But analogy to sensing. Sensing doesn't mean I have a thought in my mind. It also means that thought includes that this book is white, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can think that it's white. Try that it's the wrong color. Could I think that it's green? Doesn't seem to be possible for me. I could imagine that it's green, but imagination has in its definition thinking something false, at least in the way we're using it right now. So not thinking.
That's where people disagree.
But right, I think people.
So-
You're right,
People
but
assume that
you're-
imagination and thought are the same, and that thought is just that it's
So is there a
coincidentally-
difference? So is no difference?
One's doing on the rock and one's doing on the food. That's like that same.
What do you mean?
Right, meaning even
One's
with
acting on the actual.
right, we use
on
thought
the
and
rock,
imagination as different words, but to describe, let's say, the same.
Could I
thing.
just think that things that I think are wrong are true? When did that ever happen? I don't think anyone can do that. Any human.
No, but
At least not normal
If
people.
we're going to try to recapitulate the food example into thought, we'd use imagination and thinking as one term, and just.
What do you mean by that? I'm not talking about imagination. No.
It's exactly this. If we want to take eating and reflect it, and like what we said, that there are people that can give the definition of eating as something that doesn't reference the thing being eaten.
Yeah, oh, you know how I can do
Right.
that? But
So
by the way, the way we do that is something like this. The way we do it by eating is still by distinguishing it from other things. I could say,
Putting something in one ear and having
this
it come out the
kind, exactly. So there's a difference between, there's a physical difference, right? Between me putting something in a cup and putting it in a stomach, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the putting is the difference is the kind of thing I put it in. A cup just does nothing with the things, and a stomach has like enzymes in
Acts
it.
towards it in a
And
certain way.
no.
Okay.
A stomach is just a more complicated machine. It has more parts to it or whatever. It has enzymes that break down food. Cups don't have that. That's the difference between a cup and a stomach. Okay. In the same way, you want to tell me that thinking is a thing that. Tell me what it is. Just tell me. Finish this thought for me. Seeing, I know what it is. It's a kind of machine that reacts to light, okay, or whatever, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know what it is, so I can distinguish thinking from. I can know the difference between the machine that sees and the machine that eats, right? Because that one has enzymes and that one has rods, that whatever they're called, sight things, right? You could see the difference on the picture, right? It's easy. Right? Anything that we can show you two pictures, that's what I'm trying to get at with the thing. I think I can show you two pictures, it's easy to show the difference, right? They look different. A stomach looks like this, and the rods that in your eyes that see, they look differently, right? So I don't seem to need any reference to anything to distinguish between them in materialistic terms. They're different kinds of things, right?
Different machines.
Yeah, they're made out of different things, and so on. They're different shapes. Okay, so seeing is whatever those cones and rods do, and eating is whatever those enzymes do. Say there. Okay, now let's move on to thinking. Someone would say thinking is whatever neurons do.
Mm-hmm.
They're different. They seem to look different on X-ray than well, seeing is complicated because it's also something neurons do. But let's say there's different neurons. Okay, so that's the difference. Different machine.
And all three of those happen to be when you feed something into them, that thing it does something.
All things in the world are like that, by the way. It's nothing special.
But it still exists. It still exists.
All things are affectable.
Right.
I mean, if I push my table, it moves. If you push my eyes, they see. Something analogous. So we do have a way to define the difference between seeing and thinking just without talking about the things that it sees. Okay, and how about mistakes? Now we're gonna talk about mistakes. Could there be mistakes?
In thinking, in this understanding, not really.
There's no mistakes in thinking.
Right.
Whenever I think something, I think.
No mistakes in eating either.
Otherwise, as long as yeah, it's true. If I eat a piece of poison, it's food. I eat it. Happens to be, it doesn't work out.
Just breaks the machine. The
What's
gas
that?
on the gears.
Oh, that's a sort of mistake. machine broke. Seems to be a sort of mistake. Not the kind of mistake that I'm thinking of, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a mistake in the sense that it's not doing the thing that we're expecting it to do. Okay, what if I think? Okay, and why can't I think that white things are green?
The way that you can eat a rock.
Yeah. Or maybe I could, using the right drugs.
I think they would, but you would call
Would
it
that be a thought?
imagination.
So there's no real difference.
Correct.
Because we need to find the different neurons that do imagination and the ones that do thought, and then you'll agree that there's a difference.
Right.
Okay. And if there are such different neurons, then you know that there is thought and imagination.
Right. They're different machines.
Okay. So that's the way you would do it. Now, are any of these definitions at all related to what we talk about when we talk about thought and opinion and
so.
seeing? They are? Not really. There's something that's one of the bait and switch that scientists do all the time.
It's like it's just the most reductive thing, and then just.
I don't even know if it's reductive, but
It's reductive. Reductive in the sense of
yeah.
pushing things down to their efficient causes
And then you,
or material causes.
Then you just talk about a full purpose either way. You just talk about it as a full system after that.
Said right, but the question is:
that's what I'm saying. That's the trick that's going on. It's like
is there thinking? Is there a difference between eating and thinking? There's no difference. There's difference in like which machine does what. And nobody ever makes any mistakes. The fact that humans talk about mistakes, it just means, what does it mean when we talk about a mistake? It doesn't mean that.
Mistakes? Yeah, I mean, it's by convention and not nature.
Is there a difference between true thoughts and false thoughts? Thoughts in the sense of, like, is there a difference between me thinking? Is there a difference between me thinking that this cup is orange and me knowing that it's orange? Imagining that it's orange? Is there any difference?
Vote.
What?
By vote. Make a vote.
Because more people agree with that one?
More machines seem to think this.
We'll have to ask democracy.
If more people? But forget about the more people. Me internally. Internally, I think I'm looking for an internal difference. That's why I think that there's actually an internal definition, and that's where I want to talk about. Because the external, what we just did was like an external definition in the sense of it's built on different machine, which I don't think any people think is a good enough answer. I mean, some reductionists would say that's an answer. But that's like very obviously far from what we think about when we think about these things. And they say, yeah, that's true. Sadly, science doesn't conform to your expectations. Okay. But I think most people think there is an internal difference. In other words, that's what I was thinking about now. In other words, when I imagine that the cup is orange, I'm doing something, I'm having something, imagination. Well, could I imagine that this cup is orange? Let's try.
I can.
You can? With open eyes or with closed eyes?
Well, I can, but not referring to that.
Yeah.
So
When
that's
I'm looking
weird.
at it.
You're thinking about a different cup now. That's
Correct.
a trick. I want you to imagine that this one is
This
orange.
one, no, I can't. I can imagine a room that looks quite similar, with a tea bag coming out of it, but I can imagine that.
I think that you train yourself to do this.
What?
I'm pretty sure that people are better. There's people that are better at that, and they can imagine that this cup is orange.
As I'm looking at it.
I don't think it's a philosophical issue.
I can try.
I don't know if they could do it as they're looking at it.
I can close my eyes, but then I'm probably thinking about a very different cup. Or I'm imagining a cup.
Okay, so
Thinking about a cup.
let's assume that this. I wonder. I have to think about this. I have to talk to the like guided imagination people, how they think it works, or if it's even possible. Like most of the time when we say imagine that, it's more like adding information into a situation, right? Like imagine that when your Rebbe is speaking to you, it's really Moshe Rabbeinu speaking to you. Well, it's like a metaphor for something, right? But
But
am I
it's
like
definitely assuming a certain set of
imagining?
prior conditions that you know and trying to
Sort of like
replace
close your.
something
Oh, you
inside
can
of it.
close your eyes and replace things. You can do that,
Right,
right?
but only some things and not others. Right? We can't imagine square triangles.
Wait. Too soon we'll talk about that. Things that are
That might be
possible. Don't
replaceable.
forget about impossible
Replace
stuff.
it, maybe because that's just not. You can't. What are you replacing?
I'm not even.
So
You're
say-
flying. You're flying too quickly. I'm not even talking about impossible stuff. Very possible stuff. Question is, what does it do? Is it about the thing? That's what I was asking, because that seems to be also sort of impossible. Maybe. Is imagination about like okay? If I dreamed of you at night, was it even of you? Isn't that the question? Can you dream of people, of things? Do you dream of things? We speak that way. but they're not really of those things because nothing happened to those things.
Well, we don't dream of nothing either.
Okay, and
We dream of
the
similar
problem?
things,
said it,
right? Where things are definitely
which is a
things are definitely
limitation,
masquerading as
which is a
as
very great
language
limitation of imagination, because imagination isn't even that creative as it pretends to be.
No,
We
it's
could
rel-
pretty
it's-
much think of things that don't
it's
exist, and
relying on the
we could actually
material
think on more
experience,
things than we
right?
can of imagination, interestingly. Unlike what all the
Yeah.
people say that imagination is broader. It seems to be false. Imagination is very limited.
Mhm.
At least the...
Imagination also doesn't. There's no
Okay, but wait.
progressive movement in it, right? Meaning, if I
Oh,
start
people
thinking about
imagine.
mathematics, let's say I'm thinking about
It's productive.
numbers. I mean, okay, maybe numbers is a bad
Can
example.
produce
but
things.
It's not productive, but it's definitely not as limited to what's been, let's say, experienced prior. I
Okay,
can't
let's
imagine a color I haven't seen. I mean, okay, I'll use that as a bad example, but I can't imagine a color I haven't seen, but I can think of a thought that I haven't thought of.
Hopefully. Could you? Okay.
Hope so.
You could even think of a color that you didn't see, actually.
I can think of it,
yeah.
right, but I can't imagine it.
At least if you have a thought. I wonder.
I can
Okay.
think of there being songs that I haven't heard, but I can't imagine them without making those songs.
You can think of there being such songs, yeah.
Mhm.
You can't like actually make the song, because then you would know the song already.
Right. The problem with predicting scientific revolutions.
yeah. So wait, but let's go back, because is there like an internal difference between thinking and perceiving? That's what I want to think of. I'm trying to think if there's a difference. Like, could we define that without saying different neurons, and without saying thinking is of truly existing objects, and perceiving is of sensible existing objects, and imaginations of things that don't necessarily exist at all? Things like that. Could we do that? Could you do it internally? Like, is there like a kind of feeling? Like, I think that this is something that I would think normally. That like it's a different feeling. Thinking is like some kind of mood, and feeling is a different kind of mood. Imagining is a different kind of mood. Is it? I think that would be the way people would do it. Is there another way?
Or that feels differently.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say. It feels
Mhm.
differently. Like,
The same way eating feels different than seeing.
okay. Or the same way feeling with my touch feels different than tasting.
Feeling with my nose, right? Well, feeling with my nasal.
Yeah, but in like an internal way, not by saying it's a different part of my body that does it. Right?
No, but it corresponds to different.
Smelling is a
emotional
different kind of thing.
experience.
But by the way, it's not, because again, we're going to get the same. What's actually the difference between smelling and he's going to say the same thing for those things too. You can also define them by their objects and think that you can't define them otherwise. It wouldn't be accepted for Aristotle to say that the difference between smell and taste is that they're different senses. The difference between different senses is only that they have different objects. Or at least that's how it has to start. That's what he would think about all these things. And I'm trying to think if, like, what did people think before we read this book? I think they think that it's just different.
Yeah, they correspond to different genres of experience, or
Yeah, which means what? What is actually the difference between those different
the
genres?
sensation is different. I mean, without necessarily qualifying it, but saying that there's a difference. When I see, and when I smell. And those, it's
Okay,
circular
give me
definition, but
give me a better.
I don't think that the definition was seen as necessary until it was questioned. Because seeing is different than eating. That's why.
Yeah. What's the difference?
So again, I don't know if that's necessarily as obvious of a question. I think it's an obvious question once you ask it, but I don't think it's such an obvious question before you do.
Okay, but so tell me what you meant when you say it's different. That's what I want to know.
I'm referring to the internal experience of it. It's very circular, but I think that it's still probably what was assumed.
Well,
before.
both are internal experiences. So tell me, it's the of it that you're saying. I have an internal experience of thinking and of eating and of feeling and of jumping and all
Yeah,
these
and
things,
these
and they're all internal experiences.
and these
But what
differences-
makes the difference is that they're of something, right?
Yeah. Okay.
That's what you just said.
Right.
So you're already
I know,
smuggled in the object over here.
I'm not trying to smuggle.
No, you're not, but you're doing it without. That's the whole.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to prove, that you have to do that. I'm trying to think if there's a way out of this. Maybe there is, but it doesn't seem like
It's
there's an
very
easy
hard
way
to
out
go
of it.
back once you've asked the question properly.
No, because maybe this. I'm trying to get at that. This is the normal. Always have to get this. Maybe this is just the normal way of thinking of things. We're so used to like having this like a big curtain in front of us that's supposed to separate us from reality and say that nothing is of anything. But that's not the normal way of thinking. The normal way of thinking is that what makes a thought, this is important because everyone thinks thinking happens in here. It's not. Just like everyone realizes that seeing doesn't actually happen in here, or at least not entirely, right? It needs some machinery in there. But seeing is seeing of, right? Like, you know the difference between imagining and seeing, right? Maybe some scientists don't know, but normal people know. Imagining is seeing things in your brain, and seeing is seeing things in the outside world. That's the only difference that there could be, right? In the same way, thinking is thinking that something is true, and imagining is thinking that something, and not necessarily thinking that it's true. Right? Like you can easily imagine, assuming that you could, maybe it's hard because you need practice, but I think you could easily imagine a cup to be green. Although this cup might be a little complicated because you don't think it could be true, but assuming that it could be true, you probably could. I don't know what the answer to that question is, but you can't think that it's green. Even I can give you $1 million, it doesn't be possible. You could imagine, but you can't think. And the only difference is that it's not. In other words, that you think that it's not. We'll not even get into that. That's the only difference. And thinking in general, the only difference in thinking and perceiving in general is that thought has built in the ability to make mistakes. In other words, thinking wrongly is a real thing. Well, maybe you make a difference, it's not a true thought, whatever, it turns into a mistaken thought. But in the more general sense, you could make a mistake in thought, right? Why could you make a mistake in thought and not in perception?
Because when you're thinking of true things. And I mean, why could you make a mistake in thought?
Yeah, it seems like thinking is even more, okay, we're not talking about thinking today. Seems like that's even more connected to the thing that you're thinking than perception is. Because perception is only of a certain aspect of the thing. And as long as we perceive, we say that must have some kind of aspect like that. But thought might be entirely wrong.
Does this assume that let's say mistaken thought is imagination masquerading itself as thought? Or?
It's not masquerading. Everyone agrees that it's not a thought. Well, that's a mistake, which is like I thought it's that way, but it's not.
Why is that mistake?
That's a problem for thought. It's not a problem for.
That has to do with the thing being thought about. Then that not all thoughts are true.
Yeah.
All perceptions are.
I think so, yeah. Okay. Anyway, so let's get back to where we are. Yeah, I think so. What time is it? It's 10 o'clock already. Wow. So it's very hard to explain the difference, or at least hard. I don't know if I prove that it's impossible. It's very hard to explain the difference between different faculties without saying what they're for. Because it seems like if you say that just a thing that does a thing, then you're saying the same thing about all of them. Or if you say that they're based on different machinery, that's true, but it doesn't seem to explain what they are. It explains what they do things with, like you would say, and so on, in general. So, therefore, if you want to talk about, since we want to know what the soul is, which means we want to know what thought and perception and nutrition is, we got to know what nutrition is for, basically. Or what it's towards, or what it tends to, right? Just like sight is for seeing seeable things, and thought is for thinking intellectual things. And nutrition is for food. What it says here, nourishment, just to make the words match better, right? Okay. Now, for some reason, it talks about reproduction. Why does it talk about reproduction over here? We discussed that, right? because the four of a living thing is really twofold, like he says, sort of. Because going back, the nutritive soul is the most basic one, right? Which means the most definitive of life, or at least of mortal life. Why is it the most definitive of life? Because it's what we say. It's what we mean when we say you're alive, right? For everything that's mortal, right? We don't say that anything is alive if it doesn't have nutritive soul, right? Which means that in one way, we talk about like the nutritive soul, in other words, the capacity for nutrition, as the thing that is towards food, the thing that can eat food, right? But we need to talk about also in the more general sense, meaning as what this does for the soul, like as in what is this for, right? Because we just said that this is what the soul is, and you say what something is what it's for, and in the most basic sense, living things are for living, and what living is having nutritive soul, right? And what is having a nutritive soul for, right? So we sort of turn this is where it sort of turns back on itself, and it says it's for the living thing. Like why do things eat and digest and make neutralize? For them to live, right? This is really what it means for them to live. Same thing. Things are always for what they are. That's fine. Now, the important thing is that the living of a mortal thing, of a complete natural mortal thing, is always has sort of two levels, which is that it lives itself, it sustains itself, and it also sustains its species, which is not the same exact thing. In other words, they're similar in the way that both are for the sustainment of the thing that it is. So you need to eat in order to survive, in other words, in order to live.
But it's its own end. These things go towards
They're their own end over here. And the form of everything is its end, anyways, at least of living things. And also, in order for the species to live, you need to reproduce.
Not for broken things, though, right?
Forget about broken things. We don't count them. General rule in all of this philosophy is that we don't care about exceptions. The philosophies that care about exceptions end up nowhere. So we don't care about that. That's another different discussion. We sort of don't care about broken things. Broken things, whatever. We only care about the ideal.
See, but those things do not tend towards that.
Well, they don't live. They're dead. They're sort of dead.
Right.
Halfway is dead, or half entirely dead species. That's fine. We don't worry about exceptions again.
Yeah,
I'm
not posing it as a problem.
Yeah, we said that, but that's not the point. Right? I'm trying to understand the basic logic. Forget about the kashas, and therefore the nutritive soul, which is in other words what we most basically mean when we say something is alive. What we also mean is it's alive for living, for sustaining its own life, and for living forever, right? Which it can't do by itself. Therefore, it needs to have children. That's the basic thing. So it's for life, but life not only in itself, but also forever. And therefore, it's the same thing. That's where we're trying to get at. Like he has like two faculties or two activities that the same thing does, which is an interesting way of organizing things. Like there's two things. We can separate them into more even, but there's two things called neutralizing and reproduction, nutrition and reproduction, and both of them are done by the nutritive soul. Well, we can call it the nutritive reproductive soul, but really what we mean is the soul that makes things live as living biological things. And to live means also to reproduce, at least, which is sort of why everything lives in order to live, in order to be, and to be as much as they could. And yeah, you want to be forever, but you can't, sort of, so you want to have the species. So that's why reproduction is the same for as it has the same for as eating. Just one is for the individual and one is for the species. But it's the nutritive soul that makes you reproduce and the nutritive soul that makes you eat, which is the reproduction and eating, right? In other words, which is the keeping the thing alive. for keeping it in existence as what it is. Mm-hmm. So this leads us to like summarize how the nutritive soul, which says in this second page here, the nutritive soul, it says the soul in my header, but it's really the nutritive soul, which is all three causes of the living body, which is what we call the nutritive soul, which is the most basic soul, right? Because it reminds us that the cause has three meanings. One is where movement comes from. Second is for the sake of which. Third is the essence of it. Obviously, the soul is the essence, which is really what we discussed in the first chapter, right? Soul is what it is for a living body to be a living body, or to be capable of life. Right? It's the actuality, same thing. It's also for the sake of which, we just discussed. Everything acts for the sake of, including nature, which this kind of soul is not really an intellect, it's a kind of nature. So we need nature to be able to do things like this. We just discussed even nature has ends, right? Intellect obviously is a thing that acts towards the end because that's what makes it into intellect. But nature also does that, even if it's not intellect directly. And the soul is what directs the body for the sake of which, and the sake of which has two meanings, which we just discussed are the two meanings. We call them the purpose for which and the beneficiary for whom. In other words, I don't know how this translates into exactly what I meant, but that's what he means is the thing like that it's for, and the purpose for which it is. The thing is the soul, and is the living body, the living soul, and the purpose for it, the purpose for which is I think the eternity, like the being like God. They're like sort of two meanings of what it means. Both of them are the nutritive soul.
As we understand as living as that it's trying to be everlasting, but succeeds in a partial way.
It succeeds to itself,
right,
sort of,
it succeeds,
or in species.
Of success.
Yeah. But I think that's the two things. And it's also the source of movement in the sense that there's two kinds of movement. We talk about movement in place. We talk about movement as perception, and we say that all living things all animals have some perception. Not all of them have movement. But like we said, all of them that have movement or perception also have nutrition. Nothing can have, which is another way of saying they're all alive in this way, right? Because we don't call, on this world, we don't call things alive that don't have nutrition. Right? So life most basically means nutrition. Biology, that's what it means. That's what the life sciences are about at the end of the day. And perception is something that's based on that, something that so if it's based on that, it must be somewhat caused by that.
Like a map on top of it?
Yeah, like we discussed, because in some way, how they connect, how they're like the higher sort of less basic souls.
They're not just parts, right?
How they're not parts, but what he's referring to the one being based on the other. In order to perceive, you need to be alive. So it's your nutrition or your being alive that allows you to perceive or allows you to move in place. Or the same thing, growth and decay, which is another kind of movement. Obviously, you grow by eating, and you decay by eating less or whatever. But that's just part of this kind of life. Okay, that's the thing with this. So this is all about the soul that grows, or the growth or the nutrition, growth by eating, which is what nutrition means. Being this like principle of soul, the most basic principle of soul. Now we went through, we did this part, the third page in my thing, why Empedocles and all the people that try to relate everything to material causes are wrong, right? Remember why, right? because they don't explain that things grow in a certain way. According to Empedocles, who says, for example, that plants grow up and down, that's all messed up. Firstly, they don't actually grow up and down, and secondly, they are a certain thing. These are two arguments that he gives, very important arguments, which try to refute materialist explanations, which is what everyone nowadays believes in, right? So he says that, right? We did this, right?
Why a tree doesn't just grow all the way up?
Because Empedocles was like, well, trees grow up and down, so that's simple. I have one principle that goes up, fire, one principle that goes down, earth, and it's the fire in trees that pushes them up, and the earth in trees that pushes them down. And he says, well, that's not true. Firstly, up and down are not relevant terms here, because trees don't actually grow up and down. They're up. If you want to talk about up, you have to talk about the roots being up, because he thinks of functions, and up in a human being is the place where it takes in nutrition, which is the mouth, and down is like sort of where it grows. So trees actually grow with their head in the earth, and their feet growing up. So the whole like analogy is up and down, as if those are the like most basic coordinates, like that natural things work with, is not true for trees. Instead, it might be true for fire, basic fire, but it's not true for trees, because trees don't have their own principle of organization. This is really where we show like the soul or the form. So they grow actually not just simply up and down, blindly up and down, but they grow according to what trees want to be, what trees need to be, what trees tend to be. And also, they don't grow forever, for example. And that leads into like another point. If they don't grow forever, that also means that they, according to Empedocles, they should break apart at some point. Now, Empedocles doesn't actually have a problem with that, because he thinks they do break apart at some point. But it seems like Aristotle thinks that they don't grow apart, they don't break apart fast enough, or there wouldn't be enough coherence in the world, according to Empedocles' theory.
When you say that, it's just like its growth should be directly connected to its breaking apart, and that doesn't seem to be true.
It does.
Like, things don't seem to be breaking apart as they're growing. Maybe they break apart, but like not connected to the actual.
But Empedocles has this like thing with love and strife. Like in the end of the day, he does have the whole world just coming together and breaking apart all the time. Maybe on a very much greater scale. It's not clear. He seems to like very much believe in this like, look at a plant. Look, it's small, then it grows, then it dies, and all of these things like make sense. It's always working like according to some kind of limit. This is what we call limit sometimes. It has a limit to its growth. It's interesting. We discussed this, right? How the fact that it doesn't grow forever is actually what shows that there's a soul. Unlike matter, we tend to associate like limitless things with the soul. It's just the opposite. It's the plant, the limitedness, or the being defined aspect of things.
Object, right?
Yeah, and also like you're saying, it doesn't just fall apart. It doesn't like just grow apart until it explodes.
Let's say go with his answer. I'd imagine that if two forces are pulling apart, the more it grows, the more it should be like. That's not what happens. It grows. It seems to be like very okay, right? It doesn't. It should. It's not.
It grows into a tree. It doesn't just grow. That's the basic thing that Aristotle has a problem
Which also allows us to understand that it's separate from existence, not just by convention, but by nature, right? That it actually is different than the other thing, than the air to its immediate left and right.
Well, he would sort of say that it's just a bunch of pieces of fire that met. No, he says it's just a bunch of pieces of fire that happen to have met, or maybe they've met somehow.
Right.
By
the
something.
The fact that the tree doesn't grow sideways is just because the fire happens to not be.
Because fire goes up. No, that's why. It goes up because actually trees.
So
Aristotle says no, trees do go sideways, and you're wrong. According to Empedocles, he wants the trees to only grow up, and then he has fire as an explanation, because fire is the thing that grows up, the material thing that grows up, that goes up. Aristotle's saying that trees don't actually grow up is one of the like refutations of this. What?
They grow a tree.
Exactly. So you can't. In other words, this is like an very, very strong anti-reductionist argument. You can't reduce higher level things to lower level things, because the higher level things always do things that lower level things don't do, and also don't do things that you expect the lower level things to do. Right? So there needs to be another principle to explain them. Then he talks about fire, which is another opinion out of Empedocles exactly, which talked about fire being the principle of nourishment, because fire seems to be like a basic thing. Again, it's the basic, same reductionist thing. Fire is a basic thing that seems to grow, like it consumes and lives by consuming. So it has like the basic idea of life, seems to exist in fire, and therefore some people would say that the soul is a kind of fire. Makes sense, right? This theory. So he says this is not true. And here he uses mostly the limit argument, which is not exactly what he used it before. It might be similar arguments. His limit argument is that fire just grows forever, like everyone that can notice. But living things don't.
There are no people that are 30 feet tall.
Exactly. And if there wouldn't be people. There would be some other kind of monster. So things that are naturally constituted is limit and proportion. And limit and proportion is just another word for soul. That's the main like chiddush of Aristotle's whole way of thinking. Like someone would say the limit and proportion. Okay, and what causes those limit and proportion? It's like people think that you could say, yeah, of course it has a limit. It's a physical thing. No, the word limit doesn't exist in physical matter. There's a very important insight that he has. Like the moment you say matter organized as, you've got something besides from matter. The moment you say fire, the soul, like not strong enough fire or something like that, so it's only a big enough fire to eat. And so it would say, well, what makes it that small? Like what gives it this correct size? What gives it this proportion? And proportion is like, it's limited in all kinds of ways, right? It doesn't just go, like cancer is a thing that's not limited, and that's like not life. Yeah, it has its own limit, but most living things are not just cancer cells. And you say, well, it just happens not to be. Well, it doesn't happen not that to be. It actually happens all the time. So it doesn't happen, but that's the argument against chance. But the point is that the word limit itself, or the word proportion, once you say, well, it's fire, in proportion, well, thank you very much, you just admitted to me that there's a soul. Because proportion and limit are forms. These are not things that belong to matter. And one of the very tricky things that materialists do is they like to smuggle in words that just mean form into the definition of matter. Like physicists that say force and field and all kind of things like that. It was just enough fancy words for specific kinds of forms. And this is very important because also because the form people think that they're talking about something very weird, like very different than very basic analysis of things. Which is also what contributes to this thing. People say, well, there's no form, it's just the organization of matter. And then you say, no, what do you mean? I need a neshama. Yeah, neshama is another word for organization. It's an amazing thing. It's a spiritual thing. Like it's not matter. Maybe it belongs to matter. Maybe it can go in matter, but it's not. And so both sides seem to think either that you can smuggle in these words, or you can you need something special. I don't know. You don't need nothing special. You just need that. Okay, so that's why, like he says, these belongs to soul, not the fire, and the principle rather than the matter. Same thing. Okay, so that's. Now he talks about food. We're not going to have time to finish this thing about food. What time is it? It's 10:20. When did we start here? Nobody knows.
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock? Then we could stop. We need to go through the thing of food. If food is just contraries and the whole thing with that. And then we could know how food works. Now let's do it. So we do it? Why not? So we need to know what nutrition is, because reproduction happens by nutrition. That's what we just said. At least it's the same for nutrition. I'm not sure how it happens by nutrition in other senses. So some people said like this. So that some people said that one thing is food for its contrary. Which is like a basic insight that things come from the opposite of them. Like fire becomes fire from things that are not fire, and cold things become cold after being hot, and hot things become hot from being cold. So sort of like eating would be like fire becoming like taking over the not fire part of the world, or something like that.
It occupies that which it's not. The other theory was that it becomes like
this,
similar,
like again, like a sort of materialist. One of the ancient. I'm not out of clarity right now. The contrariest theory is like trying to get again at a very basic materialist view of picture of physical reality. Like say how there's all kinds of changes in the world. How do these things happen? So like there's a bunch of contraries. Like cold is the opposite of hot. Food is the opposite of non-food or something like that. And you would say water is the opposite of fire. And what we call feeding is just one thing turning into its opposite, which is a normal thing. Hot things turn into cold. Well, how? By touching cold things or whatever. And the same way, people would say that living things taking food is just another instance of things turning into their contraries. This was like a very basic physical theory of the universe for everything, a very ancient theory. And again, Aristotle is not happy with this because he thinks that it doesn't actually explain the limits of certain things. For example, he says, well, take fire and water, It's not true that just them being the opposite of each other causes them to feed each other. Because it's true. It's true that water is food for fire. Fire eats water, so to speak. So we could think of water being turned into fire. But fire doesn't actually get turned into water. It can get destroyed by water, but it can't get turned into water. Which means that just something being the opposite is not enough to explain the being turned into part, which is what food means. Food means one thing being turned into another in some way, right? And therefore, like the contrarious theory wouldn't help us with this. That's the basic.
Theory.
Yeah, we need a potential theory, exactly. Which a potential is an important theory because it's one-sided. In other words, it shows how some things can be human, but humans can't be everything. Because it's not just. It's really just another instance of this whole of like giving us a holomorphic explanation of things and saying that just the materialistic explanation is not enough. Because materialistic, you should expect it to go both ways, and it doesn't. So it's the fact that things are in a certain way means that you can't just explain them by going down and one step into like
each other argument.
You just now this is the contraries thing. It's something similar to all these kind of things. Okay, we're going to stop here. The next arguments are also going about this, that there's change. There's a difference between you can't just. There's like him establishing a kind of hierarchy of forms. That things don't change into each other in the same way as they change. There's always a difference between one direction and the other direction. Like he says, like, in the next thing, people say, no, the opposite. Maybe like is fed by like, right? They would say, well, is a carpenter turned into a chair when he makes the chair, or is it only one way that? Like, how is it only one way? If it's just things changing, sometimes the chairs should make the carpenters into chairs. Doesn't really happen, right? There's some difference.
The chair makes the person into the carpenter?
Yeah, it doesn't. The carpenter doesn't change at all when he makes a chair. This is an important insight if it has to do with the soul in general, because he wants to also explain how the soul doesn't change when it changes everything else. Okay, we'll get to this another time. It's just establishing like a hierarchy of the things that are changed and the things that they're changed into, or that can be changed into, and how it doesn't go both ways. I mean, you can make people into food, I guess, for other people if you really want, but that's not as people, just as meat. People are not food. It's very important. People are not made out of food. It's food that becomes into people. But people are not made out of food. I wonder if you're a cannibal. If you're a cannibal, then you don't agree with this.
I want to take sometimes the sentences that end up happening at the end of the class and make it the title.
Now this just gives us the higher. We always do that, so people should get to that.
People are not made out of cupcakes.
Exactly. Yeah, it's important. No, exactly. Because this is all the refutation. It's like very basic. All the refutation of this like physicalist way of thinking. Like basically, if people eat food and turn in, that's what people are. Then people are basically cupcakes and seltzer, you know. And he'll know it's true that so it's one way, right? You can't get the seltzer out of the person very easily, as easily as it goes in, which is just to show that it's like some kind of transformation. And this transformation is one way. So food is that which can become people, but people is not that which food becomes into. They're like a higher level thing or a different kind of form, really.
Is that why the cheer doesn't become the cup?
Yeah, no, that's the next class. Today's class is mostly the things before. We'll talk about this more. Anyways.
Yeah, I think that.
About why the contraries theory doesn't convert, it doesn't go backwards, which is important. And again, important like refutation of physicalist
Molecular
theories.
theory is right. They technically, I think that this is a interesting point. Right?
That.
See, if let's say people are, I mean, again, we want to use the word
We'll get to this.
compensation.
People are. It's true that cupcakes turn into people, but it's not true that people are made out of cupcakes. Or that's not all what people are. Because people have this faculty called the nutritive soul, whose whole idea is that there's something beyond that to make cupcakes into people. And you need a nutritive soul. That's like what we're getting at. It's not enough to like describe everything by the interactions of the sugar in the cake.
It's a schematic strategy of
Well, one basic way of to say it is that there's a higher level of organization in humans than there ever can be in cupcakes. Which means that it's not just cupcakes like sort of going into you. They need to change into something totally different. And the nutritive soul is the thing that can do that, which is an important thing. It's not like just another machine. Or you can call it another machine, but once you say it's a machine for, then you just admitted the soul. Or it's a machine with this structure. Again, that's another way of saying soul.
goal also.
Exactly. All of these words are just Well, they know already how to say the word goal, but even they say just structure is already a form. No machines work without structure that I know of. Well, that's not the address soul because it doesn't do anything, but...
Can't throw all the gears in the box and expect the watch to tick.
Well, gears also have, yeah, even that is already too
Same,
much
but it
structure.
requires a certain organizational principle to accomplish.
Yeah, and the point of the end thing is that the only way we can even describe or even define this organization is by explaining its ends, because it doesn't have any meaning. Organization doesn't mean is only another word. That's why the formal cause and the end cause are almost the same thing, maybe entirely the same thing.
The movement of a watch is only understood in terms insofar as it's telling time. Otherwise, it's just gears.
Yeah, or whatever it's for. Exactly. In other words, you can't even say organization without saying the for.
Right, but it's organized in pursuit of.
But no, organized means that. Otherwise, it's not organized. The whole difference between chaos and organization is that organized things have a goal and chaos things don't. Or matter as such has no goal. But organization of matter has a goal, is a for. In other words, explaining how do you see that it's organized? Well, look at it. I mean, matter of people say that it's not organized, it just happens to be. Well, it doesn't happen to be. Why doesn't it happen to be? Because it does something specific. And a certain way and not in a different way. That's another way of saying that the final cause is the formal cause. Or it's what makes the formal cause into a form. Anyways, that's the important thing. And that's why food is a great avodas Hashem. This is where we learn the whole avodas achila. All the kavanas. Because it's not just pineapple becoming people. It's pineapple achieving the level of organization that the human form can get out of pineapples. Or can make pineapples in. Of course, that's not really what makes people people. It's just what makes living things, because plants eat too. Sort of. Right? And animals definitely do. So that's why it's not worth for people to spend too much time avodas achila. But it's still a human thing to eat. You still need a soul in order to eat. Okay, that's the story. Shine.